And I just have a little brief presentation that is kind of just to serve as some reminders for reporting and invoicing. And then we'll have a little bit of a discussion because part of this is I want to know how it's gone so far and how reporting could be improved, and then we'll be done. So as far as financial reporting is concerned, at the end of each quarter, you're submitting an invoice detail worksheet along with backup documentation. And this invoice detail worksheet includes actuals from the previous quarter. So you'll be reporting on all of your spending that happened from October 1st to December 31st. So you're reporting on your actual spending, but then you're requesting funding for the next quarter, 25% of funding. So you should have already received 50% of your funding by this point, and you're requesting money for the next quarter, but you're reporting on money that you've already spent from this last quarter. I know some groups have had some confusion over that because it's kind of a weird setup. It was our effort at trying to pay as much as we could up front. So that's why you're getting that 25% up front each quarter, but you still have to report on what you've already spent. Beginning with this report, there is a little bit of a caveat in reimbursements. So you should have, like I said, you should have received 50% of your funding so far, 25% when we signed the grant agreement, and 25% during when you submitted your quarter 1 report. So as you're completing the actuals for quarter 2, if your actual spending at the end of quarter 2 is less than 75% of what you've received so far, you'll switch to a reimbursement schedule. And that's just because the county, our finance team, doesn't want to keep on giving organizations money if they're not spending it just for our own risk management. So if you haven't spent at least 75% of that 50% you've received so far, we'll switch to a reimbursement schedule. Well, you will receive funding based on what you've spent. So if you're in this situation, you won't be submitting an invoice for quarter 2 because you haven't spent your funding yet. So you might submit an invoice in quarter 3 if you speed up your spending a lot. But for quarter 2, you wouldn't be submitting an invoice. And so in quarters 3 and 4, if you switch to reimbursement in quarters 3 and 4, you'll receive funding for any spending done beyond the 50% of the award you received so far. Yes, Jennifer.
Can we pause for that just so
Yeah.
there's some clarification? Because what's being asked of us is we will obviously send in what our expenditures were for Q2. Let's say we're fall short. Let's say we're at 72%. You're still going to want to see that accounting through that time, right? You want the worksheet, but you're just not going to want, we cannot say, please send us 25% of our total grant. We are just asking for them, we'd be reimbursed for whatever I guess we'd be carrying a balance, right? If we haven't paid, if we've not spent 75%.
Right. So if you have not spent 75%, you would still be submitting your expenditure summary. So you'd still be submitting the actual spending so that we have record of it. But then because you haven't spent what you've already received, right, you would just be spending against what you've received so far up to this point. So in quarter 3, if you go beyond that 50% you've received so far, you would get paid for that amount that you've spent beyond 50%. But this quarter, if you're in this situation, this quarter, because you haven't spent that 50%, you haven't even spent 75% of that 50% you've received so far, you would be, you wouldn't need to submit an invoice, but you would still need to submit the financial reporting, the actual spending.
With all the like sort of PDFs of all the receipts, or that doesn't count because it's not, you're not invoicing?
I think for ease of just keeping up with it on a regular basis, yes, submit it with the PDFs of what you've already spent so that we can just kind of like check it off that this Q2 spending happened. And then in Q3, you would just be focusing on Q3. But you would just not be filling in that invoice request.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I think we're just very close. I have finishing the numbers for the salaries and benefits. So I feel like we're sort of on that bubble, and then sort of what that implies moving forward with carrying over, I don't want to say the balance, but let's say what those the 50% of that, if you're at 72% of that 50%, is that good to carry over for Q3? Is that enough to sort of sustain that? So that's where that's what's going on in my mind, if that makes sense. Because we just hired somebody finally to take on that role, which then, that will make a difference in our spending rates.
Right. And if you have specific questions, like how your numbers are working out, you can always reach out and ask me offline. But and so we did build into the worksheet. Now I sent out, because the first worksheet that we did Q1 in was locked, and it was there was like some glitch in it where it was randomly populating a number in one of the quarters and it was messing up like the summary pages. Anyways, I sent out an updated worksheet. And there is a little checkbox in the Q2 expenditure detail page, where it should do the calculation to see whether you've spent 75%. Like, so once you fill out the detail, it should, in this box, do a little calculation of the percentage of your total award, to give you an idea of where you're sitting. Okay. So the invoice process, like how you complete this workbook, financial reporting workbook, to start out, and I'm sure we have a good hand on this, but some people had questions. To start out, enter your budget on the expenditure summary tab. Complete your spending details for the quarter that you're reporting on in the correct expenditure detail tab. Review the expenditure summary tab. Be sure it matches, all the numbers match the detail tab. Get it signed. That was a frequent issue. Just for the sake of our financial reporting, we won't need a wet signature, so that can either be you print it out, you sign it with your hand, and you scan it or take a photo of it. It could also be if you send it through like DocuSign or Adobe's signature. And it could also be you take a picture of your signature and put that picture in there. It just can't be typing your name. So get it signed. And then, assuming that you're submitting an invoice this quarter, complete the invoice request tab. You will also get that signed the same way. And then you will again sign it, and submit it on Zoom Grants. Obviously, the signatures was the biggest hiccup, I think. Which is actually a pretty easy hiccup, so that's great. A few invoice tips as we were completing this process. I think finance was also trying to figure out what they wanted to see as we were doing it, so I have a few tips as you're completing the invoice request. Obviously, the the grant organization and the PO number aren't going to change. Your address isn't going to change, so those can stay steady throughout the remaining quarters. Be sure you're updating the date of the request. Be sure you're updating the reporting period. Confirm the type of payment. Is it a 25% tranche or are you in the reimbursement schedule? Be sure you're updating the invoice number. Finance is up, like we're okay with you using whatever invoice numbering system you want to use. It just can't include special characters. And they did ask that the invoice numbers make sense. So they can't just be random numbers you pull out of the air, or they can't be like the first invoice was 01 and the next invoice is October 1. Like they have to have kind of follow the same pattern. Um, and then be sure you're signing it and be sure you're completing this table at the bottom to track your award. So by the time you submit this third invoice, you should have 3 boxes filled in for the initial grant invoice request, the second grant invoice request, and the third grant invoice request.
So sorry
Yeah.
again, because
No, you're fine.
I just transferred I just did what you did. So I transferred Q1 data reporting into this new spreadsheet. On that first tab, and I don't know if others have already done this yet. There is a drop down, like on the invoice request, there is the drop down, but it doesn't seem to have, it's not auto filled for like reimbursement or quarter like it was before. At least that's not appearing. So do you want us to manually type it in?
Sure,
That was
that
that
works.
was one thing. And then
Yeah.
the other one, and maybe you'll move on to it. When I moved over our Q1 expenditures, you had requested we write salary, like position, salary, benefits, position, but the benefits are not breaking out separately from the salary. So it's just compiling an entire chunk of salary without it breaking out to benefits, but maybe I'll get to that.
And I think that's how the first one was set up too, where the benefits were on their own line below, but
Yes,
just salaries. Right.
but it's broken out salary and benefits, so it doesn't look like any benefits have been touched. Like if you look at the balance of how it's working, and maybe I'm the only one because we have multiple staff members working on it, it just doesn't quite. If that's fine by you, I mean, no one said our accounting was erroneous, but it's not breaking out. So we've not touched benefits from our line of benefits. We've only touched salaries, even though the total line from that expenditure is. Does that make sense? Like it's just a sum of all those lines? Sorry, go
Are
ahead,
you
Wendy.
are you individually noting people's salaries, or are you doing a big bulk number for all salaries?
Every staff member and the percentage of what they've worked. So they're like
So
9
but
staff.
you inserted lines so that you have each person's, okay, we have a couple of people working on this grant, but on the salaries line, we not gross it up. We do a total there, not by person.
I had asked, I thought Elizabeth, you had said, so we have everyone from like our CEO who has worked on certain things of it to our animal control to our animal techs and vets. So we have probably different staff. So it is like, it's an accounting pain in the butt for finance because they've got everyone's different pay rates and salaries, but that was compulated, but I'm just not sure if you guys were fine with the way we're doing it, we can continue to do it like that. But it is not it's just a sum, right? So it's just like line, E12 to E37, even though each line will have a salary, then it has a line for the benefit for that employee, and then has a line for salary, line for benefit. But then there's
Okay.
it doesn't break out salaries from benefits on the bottom line. It's just pulling from salaries.
So,
It,
okay, and I'm trying to remember how you did yours. Did you break it out in like a salary line and a benefit line in there? Okay. Yeah. So some people did like had the salaries and then they just lumped all the benefits in that one benefit line, if that makes sense. They didn't
Yeah,
like break.
I mean, I can send this. I don't want to bog everyone else down. I find it when I'm looking at it again, it's the, we followed the template, but it doesn't draw quarterly, there doesn't seem to be a separate way to pull the benefits from the compilation. Like, it's not like it's tabulating salaries E 12, 14, 16, 18, and then benefits E 13, 15, 17. Does that make sense? So that it's like pulling for two different things.
Yeah, right. The way it's set up is that it sums up just the salaries and then it just asks for like a lump sum for benefits, which
Okay.
is is yeah, because I do remember, I didn't remember that it was you all, but I did remember seeing at least one organization that like broke out the individual benefit lines. And that, I mean, that works. But it's also okay if you just lump sum them. Because what I did to check, I mean, I obviously looked at the payroll sheets that people submitted and made sure that things were lining up. But I also like my background is in budget, and so I have a good idea of like what percentage of salaries makes sense for benefits generally. And so if people didn't individually break out the benefits, I did kind of do that mental check to be sure that like this benefit number is not exorbitant for this salary number too. So
So for
if that
Q,
makes sense.
so for Q2 reporting, which is due January 15th, you just need, again, just the salaries and then one line for benefits.
That's how it's set up and that works. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm almost sure that template had like an employee and then benefits right underneath it in the template, which I was trying to follow, but maybe I'm wrong. And then you just need the payroll stubs like you did, or what, whatever we gave as supporting documentation to verify that these people are working. It is what it is. Is that right?
Right. Yep.
And I want to apologize for my earlier comment because I was only looking at the summary tab. On the other tab, the expenditure detail, we do list employees separately.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so I didn't want people to be confused by thinking I wasn't doing similar to what you were doing. I just hadn't looked further into the document.
yeah. But if you still have questions, like obviously just reach out and I can try to help however. But yeah, it's okay if you don't um individually break out each person's benefit costs. So okay. Thinking about programmatic reporting. This deals with demographics, your SMART goal updates, and in the second quarter and fourth quarter, there are a couple reflection questions. So for the demographic reporting, these are those counts of people that we're serving. So there is the basic data which is in question 2 and 3, which is your number of households. This is going to be the smallest number because you could have multiple individuals in one household, and your number of individuals. It's also in question 3, we ask the number of client impact points. So this is probably going to be your largest number because this is going to count like each individual service you're providing. And then we ask for racial information. And the way this was originally set up may not be the way that some organizations are doing it. And I wanted to have a little bit of conversation about this. So the way we intended is that the racial designations would be the number of Asian, the number of Black, the number of white, the number of other. And this total should equal the number of individuals. And then we also ask about ethnicity, the number of Hispanic, the number of not Hispanic. And this total should also equal the number of individuals. And then we ask about age in question 2, the number older than 18, the number younger than 18, the number older than 60. This total could be equal to, probably less than the number of individuals, depending on your organization. And then we ask the number of households in each zip code, and this total should equal the number of households. The way, let me go to the next slide before I jump into this. If your demographic counts are not aligning in this way that we kind of had intended, or if you feel like there's any other issue or interesting detail that you want to explain, please explain it in question 4. For example, do you allow clients to self-describe their race or ethnicity? Do clients not respond to some of the demographic questions? And so your totals don't match up to the total number of individuals served. Are there multiple ways that you might count client impact points? And you want to be clear about how you're counting it. Like some people say, well, these are the clients that we're serving, whereas other people say, and so this is how many client impact points, whereas other people are counting like each time that client visits or something. So just there is a question in question 4 that allows you to kind of have the freedom to describe anything to demonstrate the work that you're doing and to be sure that it just helps me as I'm looking at it so that I can understand what your numbers mean or don't mean. And then that way it might save me having to track you down in an email before I can pay you. So
I will say, like, and I know I've emailed you, and it is very tricky, particularly with the incoming administration asking these questions.
right, yeah.
There wasn't for I identify for more than one, and there wasn't I decline to identify. So those were definitely ones that we capture and we sort of just write like decline to identify race or identified as more than one. So you might get a count as someone identifying as people are more than one race, and that really wasn't there before. So I don't know, sometimes if it makes more sense to double count if they identify as Black and Asian, do they get a count for a Black and an Asian person or multiple? Like it was very the way it's set up is very, I don't want to say binary, but it's very much like check the box, and people's identities are not check the box necessarily.
And that's excellent that you said that, because I think obviously this is our first year and I was trying to go off of what, like we were in talking about this, we were trying to go off what other grant programs did and captured. And as I was reading reports, I saw comments like that in question 4, and I saw organizations that just had multiple race and ethnicities that they captured. And so I kind of wanted to discuss how can we make this better next year? Yes, Wendy.
So what we did, so if someone tells us Black, white, Asian, and then we did have, what we did in the things that said other, we included both people who said multi and the number we had that was unknown. So by putting the unknown in the other category, we were able to always have our numbers tie as you were looking for. So I guess my question is, can we continue to put unknown in the other category so the numbers tie, and maybe give you a little note on the bottom that says there are 14 unknowns in the above numbers?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. And so I did, I'll skip this for a second and go straight to this since we're already discussing. So with the United Way team, we were kind of reflecting on this issue, and we were talking about how we could make this better next year, what makes sense going forward, why are we collecting certain demographics and not others. And so like these were our thoughts. First of all, we want to be inclusive. So are these options allowing for inclusivity? Or do we allow more self-identifying to create a greater sense of inclusion? There is a comfort level to be considered, like I think, Jennifer, you mentioned, especially with the incoming administration. Are good people going to be comfortable with some of this reporting and with answering some of these questions? There is like an operational consideration. And I think, Jennifer, you also had we had this conversation at the very beginning of this grant process. Like, what works within your operations as far as demographic collection, what makes sense within your flow of work. Is there some way that we can make this work better within your operations? Um, like accuracy is a big consideration because I'm taking everyone's reports and combining them. And I mean, in the end, I'll be looking at combining them and trying to report out on these are who we served. So how can we talk about this in a way that we're getting accurate data? Um, and then there is a data use consideration, and this is more especially on the county end. Like if I collect this data, how will it compare to other grant programs and the data they're collecting? Because like I said, we came up with this set of data, demographic data points based on what other grant programs were collecting. And so how can we make sure we're trying to compare like numbers? And then finally, this grant is a grant centered on race and equity. And by having these very like binary racial and ethnicity demographic options, is that in line with like our goals and our mission with this grant? And what are we missing? So do you all have thoughts on how this specific demographic collection is going, and how, like, thinking about these considerations, how it do you have ideas on how things could be better, I guess? Yes, Wendy.
Um, and I'm not suggesting that we collect this data now, but there are two things I think we don't get to with the sort of traditional counts. One for us is non-English speaking, so we have lots of people who are non-English speaking, whether it's Russian or Polish or French, I mean, whatever it is. And we're not capturing that. And that's a challenge for us as an organization to manage. But again, we're not capturing that. I know it's there, but I don't have a data point in my data system. So I'm not asking you to add it, but I'm noting that it's a missing item. The other thing that's I think is missing generally from equity data is information on mobility. Again, our members are all older adults. So about a third of them are using a cane, a walker, a wheelchair, or have sight or hearing challenges. And that mobility issue for not just this grant program, but across the board, never comes up as something that we're able to report on. But I think it deserves being thought about as we look at these issues of equity.
That's really helpful. And I think that's helpful not just for reporting purposes, but also for how we look at future grant applications, as
right.
highlighting that it's not just racial equity that we can look at, it's also
Right.
other forms of equity. Nancy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I can completely understand the constraints and the challenges with trying to figure this all out, because God knows in our country, we haven't figured it out anywhere across the board. So I appreciate all the intent here. I guess I keep coming back to what is the purpose, coming back to all the goals of this particular funding source. And if it is truly to be as inclusive as possible, I do feel like it's really important for the client participants to self-identify. I do think that we should never be imposing that upon those individuals, regardless of what our agencies are doing. I think that individuals should be able to do that. So I can't speak for everybody here, but we certainly follow that. And I appreciate that you're trying to break out of these very discrete, colored kinds of ways of looking at things. A couple of things in the other category. I mean, maybe you've already decided to do this, but we, as Wendy was suggesting, putting in those notes down there for now, that's fine. I'm wondering for the non-disclosures, the decline to disclose actually having its own separate category. If we want to dig more into why people are not disclosing, whether they don't have access to this information, they don't feel comfortable. I mean, that's another conversation. And another thing for us, we're a parent support program or a home visiting program, because the age is broken down broadly between under 18, which is the minors, and then older than 60. Okay. Under 18, we actually have our parents. We're serving parents, and then we're serving their children. So I don't know. I mean, for us, that distinction is really important. We have teen parents that we work with in addition to adult parents. I don't know if you want to capture any of that kind of information because there are unique or particular needs that go with that, whether again, adding down a breakdown about the age, just a little more distinction for that. That may not be an issue for anybody else, but it is for our program. That's a very important distinction. Who we're working with. We're always working with parents, and then sometimes those parents are actually minors. So that's what I wanted to add into this.
I do think so, like, I think a benefit of the fact that this is just county money, it's not tied to any federal funding, is that our grant, we could go completely to self-identifying. We don't have to follow like specific grant, like federal guidelines as far as racial and ethnic designation. So I do like I saw in some people's reporting, they had said we allow people to completely self-identify. We tried to put these self-identifications in these boxes, but this is what the true breakdown was. And I thought that was really interesting to see. And I thought that was more in line with the values of this grant, at least. So Jennifer, what were you going to say?
Yeah, and I want to thank you for giving us an opportunity to provide some meaningful feedback, particularly as you're reviewing different the NOFA grants for 26. I'm going to echo a few things that Wendy said and what Nancy said. We are 80% Spanish speaking when we're out in the community, so all of our information, like most of the surveying, is in Spanish, and that's not captured. I mean, it's just that's how we do it. And I would never the people have to fill out the survey, and if they don't tick it, I just put it down as declined, like they did not choose to identify as that. And I think that that's a fair way. I think what's not also, in addition to languages, is literacy. And there's a lot of people that we serve that do not read. And then that's a sensitivity where it feels very uncomfortable sometimes for myself and our staff to ask them, what do you identify as? Do you identify as white, Black, Asian, Latino? You know, I'm speaking to people, and I think going back to, does the county value programs that show more diversity than not? Like, is it, I'm just curious to see what merits an equity grant in terms of here's who we're serving, like this is the percentage. How is that assessed? Are you just because I'm now questioning why we've done maybe 650 individual households now, and we're sitting on all this data, but I don't know to what extent what that means. So I'd be curious to see why that's important, because to Wendy's thing, there are barriers, and barriers are literacy, barriers are transportation, and that's why we go out into the community. We don't have people come to access our services. There are barriers. There's technological barriers, and I don't know if we're talking about equity, then those are the different barriers. If it's a racial equity, then that seems to be more relevant, and I just don't know what the priorities are for that.
Yeah, I will say, as a bit of background, I think this grant program did start out with definitely a focus on racial equity. I think it is, as the discussion is expanding, we are wanting to include different types of inequities and be sure we are breaking through the various barriers. And so I would like to hear about what those barriers are, so that I can include that in any kind of summary report that I deliver to the county. Like say, like these are the demographics that we're reaching. So we are highlighting this racial, trying to meet the needs of racial equity, but these organizations are addressing all these other inequities too. And so I don't know how that looks for like reporting purposes. Maybe that's something that gets included like in Q4 when we talk about your total impact. And Q4 also includes looking at the year through the racial equity lens, like who is missing, who is burdened, who benefited. And so that could be a place that you really highlight, these are the inequities that we were able to address beyond just these racial demographics that we're collecting. Because I think that is where at least I would like to focus, showing how we are meeting these inequities.
Can I make a suggestion then? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I know because those of us who just did the grant for next cycle, when you ask those questions, who's burdened, who's missing, who benefits, the county has yet to come up with a succinct definition of that. You link to a video that then you have to go through. And so if you can't articulate, if the county cannot articulate very clearly what that entails and provide examples, it's very frustrating or it feels like it's a very gray area of what you want. And I have raised this before. I understand the intentions, but there's been a lack of clarity since those questions have come up about what those truly mean, and with concrete examples, because referencing a video that you then have to like fast forward a training video is not a good, like, what is missing. For example, if your program is providing this and you know this, I mean, that's a little bit more concrete in the way you do the logic model and the budgeting. Sorry.
Jennifer, thank you, because I think those were some notes we took away from the technical assistance sessions around that defining and how in future grant opportunities that to try to provide those examples in the technical assistance sessions as well as in the actual like questions to say, like, for example, if you offer a childcare program but you have to drive to it and someone has a barrier with transportation, like would we be missing families who don't have access to transportation? So we've definitely talked through some of those pieces, and I think that's really helpful. And I think to Elizabeth's point, this grant is growing, right? Last year was the pilot year. Now we're in the second year and we're continuing to learn and we're taking in all this feedback. So these sessions are particularly helpful. And as we think about the data and specifically inclusivity and equity, initially it did start very kind of race focused, but it has grown and we are looking at all these versions of social equity and other ways. So I do think anywhere in your discussion questions or anywhere else in your reporting that you want to speak to things like addressing digital equity, addressing transportation equity, addressing food deserts, those are all incredibly important as we talk about the reach and why when we think about equity and we think about inclusion, we know there's determinants with race, but there's other determinants as well that we might want to be really thinking about and including. And as we think about growing this grant opportunity, hopefully, right, and going forward, that we really think about those data points. And then as we, maybe get to talk to the county, like when we think about the dashboards and things, and that this is like big picture talk, but like, what are other things that maybe we need to think about with the dashboards too? And when we were exploring the demographic options, we went to like the American Community Survey, which has like 20 pages of options to select. And we knew that was, a bit obviously burdensome. So we really talked about that more self-identifying and really letting individuals take ownership of how they feel comfortable identifying and what they feel comfortable identifying. So also really recognizing that like some folks feel very uncomfortable identifying with sexuality or identifying with age or identifying with ability. So just really empowering our community members to speak to who they are, where they feel comfortable speaking to that. And when they don't feel comfortable speaking to that, having that option of choosing not to identify or participate. So I think all these points are really helpful and we take really copious notes during this. So this helps us so much as we continue to go forward. So we really appreciate that and trying to, in real time as much as we can make adjustments, but also make adjustments for future opportunities. So I just wanted to kind of say thank you so much for this.
Wendy, did you have questions?
Yeah, so my comment is on a different version of our how we count things, and it's households. And Elizabeth
Right.
knows that I had a correction I had to make because everything we do is about individuals, and I reported individuals and I did zip codes by individuals, and then it's like, no, 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 you need household. And it's like, okay. But that was a challenge for me. Um, Not because we don't know households, but we never look at the data that way. And then, on some level you think, oh, how hard can it be? It's, there's John Smith and Mary Smith, and it's like the Smiths. And it's like, no, they have different names, so I can't find households easily. So just FYI, and I know other programs, Household Matters, so I'm not objecting to it. I'm just noting that I didn't realize upfront how important it was to look at household versus individual counts. And I'm prepared to do it going forward, when we made the correction. So my question, so that was just making a pitch. But second to the pitch is, since I have bad data in there for Q1, am I able to go in and fix Q1 data? I know I
think-
sent you the revised data. I don't know if you can go in
I
and
think
fix
you
it.
are. I don't know if I can go in and fix it, but I think it should be open for you to fix.
Okay, so
if you
that's
can
just
update it.
Yeah. One thing, and we'll know at the time. I do have a different subject, and I don't know if you're going to get to it on this presentation, and it's the presentations itself later this month, and whether there's any, insights you can give us on that and who the audience is, et cetera. But I just want to put that as a parking lot item before the call ends.
Okay, yeah, we can answer that at the end. Any other comments on demographic considerations that you think would be helpful to think about as we look at next year's reporting?
Sorry, I just don't want you to hear me clear my throat 1,000 times. So we collect household demographic information, how many people are in your household, but the person that is self-reporting is I identify as X.
Right.
But that's not necessarily what their household composition is. So,
Right.
so that's a reality that we're not going to go through. Oh, you have 3 kids. Are each of them the same way you identify? I mean, that seems a little intrusive. So we don't do that. We just, if you identify as this and you have a household of 7, that's being allocated 7 towards that. I hope that that's okay.
Right. That is, yeah, we recognized that would be an assumption that many people would have to be making. So that's okay.
And I don't know if it's explicit or implicit that we are not asking people about income, but I don't know if is a condition of this grant, was it to be income eligible to receive services? I know that by definition where we co-locate and where we do our programs with, but so this is, I don't know if that's something to consider or how you would want to do that, but I don't remember asking, do you receive any government subsidies or any assistance?
No, we haven't. That's not a condition of this grant. So it's again, that might be something that you want to highlight in like your final reflection as far as like this is how we're addressing income inequities, but it's not specifically a part of this grant.
I will say for us, and again, just as part of the conversation, for us, this grant does focus on the people who are lower income that we help. So it is something that we talk about often in our materials. We're still giving the count on everybody, but the 41% that are lower income are the people that we talk about often.
Yeah, and I think some people have like SMART goals that specifically discuss their lower income people that they're serving. So I think that it might show up there if that was a part of your SMART goals, but it could also show up in your discussion, your impact statement at the end.
Right.
But. Okay, well, if you have any thoughts later, you can always email me, and we will keep on trying to improve and think about this and try to be inclusive and focus on our values. So I did want to, if I can, let's see, highlight that in quarter 2, there are a couple unique reflection questions. They ask you, have you had any challenges? And have you had to make any changes? And so there's not like, I'm not looking to get you in trouble for anything. I just want to know is like, how's it going? Kind of just check the pulse. And then in quarter 4, that's where you have those equity focused questions and kind of your conclusive statement. And it's really this conclusion where you can really shine and say like, this is how great how much we were able to do this past year thanks to this grant. So that's that in quarter 4. That's what I will be paying a particularly close attention to so that I can give some highlights to the board to show them how this grant was a good investment. Yay. So any questions about reporting?
No, I think I know that I have a few very particular things, so I'm not gonna, those were my overall was just the benefits that weren't pulling for me because I think the way I read it was employee salary, employee benefits broken out because everyone has different salary or pay rate and had worked a different percentage of time on the grant. So you're saying salaries broken out, but benefits can be one lump line.
Right.
Okay.
Are there any technical issues with Zoom grants that you all are having? I know there are technical issues on my end, so I just wanted to see if there are technical issues on your end or if it's going all right.
I think Zoom grants is always fun. You don't go into it for 3 months, and then the first time you log in, you go, where am I supposed to be going? What do I click on? I know I've seen that page before. How do I get to it? But then, you keep clicking around and you find it.
Well, I still haven't been able to find one payment that I marked as paid. So for one organization, it's
Yeah.
just not showing that it's paid. So it's paid.
My biggest
It's
problem
paid in
is
our system.
are the invoices. I'll start doing an invoice and then somehow I'll time out and I think, well, maybe it's saved and I can go back and find it. And it's like I can't. And then at some point I get a screen that says, here are 12 invoices you started. It's like, what do you mean? I wanted to find those before. How did they show up now?
Yeah, I think uploading those I feel like, or the supplemental documentation and making sure I was putting it in the right spot was a little tricky. I don't know I can't remember because I only did that one time, but sort of breaking out, travel and whatever expenses in one PDF and then where to put it. I don't know now. I'm blanking on how to do it.
As long as it's all attached there, I assume I will find it. And so it'll be okay. We'll figure it out this year.
I figured
And
you would come after me if there were things that were grossly negligent.
yes, I will eventually come after you. Speaking of me eventually coming after you, if you don't know, this is peak legislative season for the state of Virginia. And one of my other duties as assigned is now working on that. So if I'm a little slow to come after you, that is why, and I apologize. Anything else? I think we already talked about presentations for the FY26 grant. And so you have freedom to decide how you want to present as long as you're covering the information that we are asking for. You can have a PowerPoint. You can bring who you want to help you present. You can just you'll get an invitation once I have the schedule firm. I think there are some organizations that still haven't signed up for slots. So once that's done, I'll send out an invite. There are community members who will be there present, and we'll have people from our team present to listen to your presentation and to ask questions if we have any questions. Any other questions about how the presentation night will be?
Is it 10 minutes? Is that
So
the slot?
you have a 15-minute block of time, and we kind of recommended maybe do 10 minutes for your presentation and allow 5 minutes for questions and answers, but you can really split it up however you feel like you need to.
Elizabeth, did you suggest that there were going to be specific questions that you want to make sure that we answer in the presentation?
There is in the grant guidelines, and let me stop. In the grant guidelines, there was, and in the rubric, it covers the questions. So, I don't know. There are
Could
like
you
5.
could you maybe share those with us electronically after the call or when you send out the schedule?
Yeah, I can do that.
That'd be great.
And it is, I'm pulling them up really quickly. They are, let me share my screen really quick, just so you can get a clear idea. They're nothing like super groundbreaking. It's just to give people an idea of your program. So you're, whoo, that was big. Defining the inequities that you're addressing, describing how your services address the inequities, demonstrate your expertise in providing the services, demonstrated the intended community impact through the proposed services, and describe how you might work with partner organizations or community members to improve your programs and outcomes. But yeah, I can share these. I'll include these maybe in the invitations also.
And in the appendices, Wendy, is the rubric of how those will each be scored. So how you can earn the maximum points. So the things you need to be covering to earn the maximum points. So we always recommend referencing back to the rubric. You'll see there's the rubric for the written questions, and then there's a specific rubric that the community members will be using for these 5 questions as well. So if it just helps you, we recommend you, like, as you're setting up a presentation, put that rubric in front of you so you're working towards your maximum points, just like you did with your written application, putting the rubric in front of you and trying to write to your maximum points.
Any other last questions? Okay, well, thank you all for your discussion and your thoughtfulness and your patience as we are trying to develop this grant program. Yes, Wendy?
No, it's mechanical. So the presentations are going to be on Teams.
Yes, they will be.
So and does Teams work similar to Zoom, that you'll give me the ability to share and I'll be able to click through on my presentation?
Yep, you should be able
Because
to.
I've never been a presenter on Teams. I know that sounds stupid, but it's just we don't use it.
And if you have any worry about it, you can always share the presentation with me beforehand, and we can also advance
just
through
do it
the
like a
slides
5 minute. Yeah.
If that would help ease some of your concerns, we're happy to help that way too.
Great. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much for this conversation.
Yep. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.